Today's lecture is about reading the Hearts of Iron 4 modding files, including the country files, history files, and localization files, as well as a few other odds and ends, to understand how to mod more efficiently. It is very important to know what each block in a file does so that you can manipulate it easily. But before we get into any of that, I want to demonstrate how to actually get into the Hearts of Iron 4 files. If you want to get to your mod files, go to Documents, Paradox Interactive, Hearts of Iron 4, and scroll down to the folder that says Mod and click on that. You'll see a folder that has your mod as well as a descriptor file. It is in that mod folder that you will make the common folder as well as the history folder and your other folders that include all of the modding files within them. Getting into the actual Hearts of Iron 4 files is important for copying folders among other things. If you want to actually get into it, an easy way is through Steam. You simply right-click on the game, click on Manage, and then click Browse Local Files. You will then be presented with all of the files that Hearts of Iron 4 has. Now, let's examine multiple different types of files that we will be needing to read and modify in our upcoming episodes. For our first example, let's use a country file that is inside of the common folder. Once you open it, you'll see a number of different things. The first one being the graphical culture. This tells the game what character model to use for the soldiers, whether it be a European one, an African one, or an Asian one. There's a list of the names of all of them on the wiki, and I'll leave a link below so that you can find them easily. Next is the color command. You can see it has an equals after it, and then a grouping defined by parentheses with info inside of it. This info is 3 separate color values. These are RGB color values, meaning the first one is red, the second one is blue, and the third one is green. Lastly, I've added a little comment at the end. Comments are defined by things that have hashtags in front of them, whether it's one word or a whole line of code. Basically, putting a hashtag there forces the game to not read that line, meaning you can write whatever you want there. This is useful for any helpful notes you want to write, or for organizing. Next, let's look at a history file, specifically a state file within the history folder. You can see there's a number of different blocks on the screen, the first one being the state block. You can see it clearly defined by these parentheses, and if you click on the parentheses, it'll light up, and the closing one will also light up, showing you where it starts and ends. This is important because, for example, if one of these parts was outside of this parenthesis, the file would not be read correctly by the game and would not work. Next, you have the ID of the state, which is the number that the state has. And then you have the name. This has to do with localization, which we'll talk about in a minute. And you also have a comment here, as you can see. Next, you have manpower, which is pretty self-explanatory. It's the number of people within the state. And the state category. There's a number of different state categories, some being town, city, megalopolis, and there's a bunch more, but I'll leave a list of them down below. Next, you have the history block, which notice is still enclosed within the state block, and ends right before the province block. The history block tells the game everything it needs to know about who owns the state and what is within that state. You can see the owner is FRA, or France. That is a country tag, which we'll talk about next episode. You can see the victory points that the state has, and the buildings that are within that state, as well as the cores of that state, or who rightfully owns it. Next, you have the provinces, which tells the game what provinces the state owns. This concludes a basic overview of a simple state history file, but we'll talk more on this in the next episode. Next, let's talk about localization. Remember that within our history file, there was a section for a name that said, in all caps, state_1, with quotation marks around it. The quotation marks around the text tells the game to look at the text within in the localization files. Let's take a look at how localization is organized within the Hearts of Iron 4 files. After clicking on it, you can see there's multiple different languages. We'll click on the English one, and we'll see all of these different files that show up. It doesn't actually have to be like this. You can make just one file that holds all of your names in one spot, as long as it has _L_English at the end of the file. However, I recommend cutting them into different files to organize them better. Let's look at the inside of these and see how they work. As you can see, all of these files start with the phrase L_English with a colon after it. This is necessary for any localization file, and if you don't put it, the file will not work. Notice right away that a capital state _1 is right here in the localization file. What was written inside the quotation marks is directly here, followed by a strange combination. See that each phrase is followed by a colon and a 0, and then a space, and then the name of the state in quotation marks. The colon and the 0 are necessary, as well as the quotations. Writing a name that has quotations in it, as well as the quotations on the outside, will break the file. There's other numbers you can use instead of 0, but I'm not quite sure what they mean. I have had no problems using only 0. Looking at something different, such as a national focus localization file, you'll see there are other ones that have a _DESC after them. This defines the description of that icon. At this point, you probably realize that Hearts of Iron 4 modding doesn't really require any real coding, at least for simple mods. It mostly requires just reading text and being able to modify it in a way that the game allows. Once you know the syntax that the game allows, it is incredibly easy to mod all by yourself. If you have any questions, it is also easy because there's a wiki with all of the syntax blocks on them that you can look through and find exactly what you're looking for. Now that we know how to read and edit most of the files that we will need to make a new country in Hearts of Iron 4, we can now move on to the country creation part of this series.